At the time of writing this script, I have no idea what angle I'm choosing to approach Metal Gear Solid 1 from. All I know is Metal Gear Solid 1 is constantly popping up into my head recently, and I think I'm beginning to understand why. It's not just because it's a timeless classic and my favourite MGS game, or because of its hauntingly beautiful soundtrack, or the countless other adjectives I could use to describe its impact on gaming culture. Everything that can be said about its achievements and faults has been said to death, but what I offer here today in this video is how a game like this can deeply affect the individual, or more specifically, how this game strikes a completely different chord after my life and perspectives have changed due to recent events outside of my control. Control is the key word there, because Metal Gear Solid 1 is all about the lack of control over oneself and the events around you, despite your best intentions. And it ends with a hopeful message about how to regain it. It has become infinitely more relevant to me this past year, and my love for this game has only strengthened drastically. It's time for me to go into why. It's really interesting to me that Solid Snake goes through this entire game being strung along like a puppet, both literally by the player and by the government in-game. Even before the events of this game, he has isolated himself in Alaska, crippled by trauma and alcoholism. He's never really been in control of himself. He's never exercised any kind of free will. And the fact he's a clone of someone else entirely, a product of a shadowy government project, never really gave him the opportunity to be an individual. In the events of this game, he's barely briefed on the mission at hand, and unbeknownst to him at the time, he was being exploited for his skills in order to spread a manufactured virus to strike the terrorists. He was never there because his superiors believed in his ability to succeed in an impossible mission like this. Yet, even though he becomes aware of his lack of agency over the situation halfway through the game, he proceeds and sees it through, simply because it's his mission to complete. I love the moment when he becomes aware that Naomi's real intention was to kill Snake, which is why she willingly injected him with the virus. And he responds saying he doesn't blame her for wanting revenge, but can't die yet, he still has a job to do. That line really hit me upon revisiting this game as an adult, not just because of how badass it is, but also because Snake has so little regard for his own life. He was born to be a toy for the government and Zero, a shadow of a very real legendary soldier. Yet that's all he knows, so he exercises his remarkable willpower to see it through regardless of the dozens of betrayals he goes through. Meryl calls him out on how alone and sad his life actually is, but he brushes it off and returns to his sense of urgency. It's fascinating how similar both him and Big Boss are, but how polar opposite their ideologies ended up being. Big Boss was also used as a toy to clean up the government's mess, that mess being to kill his former mentor and mother figure. Yet he used that to break away from America and try to form his own unit, free of any one nation's control. Solid Snake feels undeserving of life, especially after the many lives he's taken, so he acts as the weapon he was created to be. It's only through the events of this game and the characters he comes across, namely Naomi and Meryl, that he begins to gain the humanity he was deprived of from birth. Many NGS fans gravitate towards Big Boss because he's a much more human character, and you're not wrong. But lots of people forget the character arc Solid goes through in Metal Gear Solid 1. A man with no purpose in life, no human connections other than Campbell and Kaz. A man who tried to open up in prior entries, but received nothing but trauma and loss in return. Yet by the end of the game, he chooses to look beyond his genetic limitations and live freely. To me, there's nothing more human than that. Liquid Snake was a mirror into what Solid could have become had he obsessed over his genetic limitation and the cards he was dealt with at birth, and turned it into a vengeful attack against the world. Solid was never corrupted by the events or the tragedies that surrounded him, twisting his morals to the point where he turned a blind eye to committing atrocities in order to achieve his goals. He knew exactly who he was, and rejected any label of heroism. He didn't pretend he was anything other than a cold-blooded killer. Psycho Mantis says that Solid is even worse than Liquid, which really puts things in perspective. Ironically, despite all this, he'd end up being the most free Snake out of the big five. If it isn't clear by now, Solid Snake is my favourite character, not just in MGS, but any game. You might be sitting there wondering how someone like me, a 25-year-old, could relate so heavily with this character, specifically in this game. I was obviously not a child soldier deprived of any human rights, cloned from a superior man, and surrounded by war all my life. However, growing up, my identity was often dictated to be what was expected of me, and to venture from that was met with mockery and isolation. These feelings are not specific to me. Most people go through this, but it's how I responded to these constant limitations placed on me that made me different. Like Snake, I always convinced myself that I was undeserving of pursuing a life higher than the one I was given, that I should never step outside the box others placed on me, which hid me from the opportunities of the world. I was often a puppet, strung along by the psychomantics of my life. Although I've relinquished most of that control and am now rediscovering my individuality, I'm still paying the price of those early years by being so clueless of my purpose, thanks to how long I was conditioned to follow a certain path by my superiors, not unlike Snake and his commanding officers. Metal Gear Solid 1 has a lot we can all learn from, and these important themes only get accentuated in its extremely relevant sequel. Boy, do I have a lot to say about that game. All in due time. Metal Gear Solid 1 is a dumb cheesy game that recreates the feel of 80s action movies. It has difficult and dated controls, and the characters look like potatoes. But on the other hand, Metal Gear Solid is a beautiful descent into an increasingly hopeless situation, with characters and performances so real and captivating. You not only care so much about both the heroes and villains, but you leave the game transformed with the idea that genes aren't your definition. They're not the encompassment of your identity. What you choose to do with the hand you're dealt is the only thing that counts, so use it to better yourself and then in turn, better the world around you. Once you're done with that rationalization, you get the bonus of incredible music, bone-chilling atmosphere, superb voice performances, iconic imagery that would put other games to shame if it was modernized correctly, and an equally iconic protagonist, my favorite of them all. It's insane to me that this all began when I was 4 years old in 2002. Yeah, MGS1 came out the year I was born, so obviously I couldn't play it then. I had this mysterious PS1 disc containing dozens of demos, and I put on this mysterious game that began like this. Hilariously, I found the music and imagery quite scary, especially when Snake blinks at the camera. In-game only terrified me more with its claustrophobic vignettes and eerie music. The game was too difficult for me, yet something about it was so alluring to even my childlike brain that I kept going back. Now, 25 years after the game was released, I'm here, further enlightened by the timeless themes this game explores. It shouldn't have taken a life-threatening lesson before I realized the futility of all the limitations that were placed on me by others and by myself. But because of it, I came back to Metal Gear Solid 1, not only reliving my passion for this classic, but further reinvigorated by its many life lessons. I'm sure there are a few people that will scoff at this notion, because it's just a game, bro. And yeah, it is just a game. But games are art, and art has always been a celebration of expression, individuality, and humanity. Metal Gear Solid 1 is the epitome of that.